Hello, everyone. I'm Lakai Newman with Soda. Thanks for joining today's call. Today's webinar will be an exploration of how AI can drive transformation across every facet of your agency, from audience targeting to operations. This webinar is in partnership with Soda partner Milestone Advisory, and we're joined by Tom Blah and Martin Adams, and I will let them introduce themselves in just a moment to kick off the conversation. But before we begin, I'll just share a few logistical notes. We are recording today's call to return highlights to you and your teams. Please feel free to ask any questions by using the Q&A feature during the conversation, and we'll have some time near the end to address those. And lastly, please share any thoughts, reactions, or ideas for future discussions, and we'll be sure to capture those. With that being said, I'll turn over to Martin and Tom to get us going.
Thanks, Lakai, and hello to everyone, and thanks for joining. So I just want to start with a quick introduction to Milestone Advisory and who we are as a firm. We're an M&A and growth advisory boutique, so we focus primarily on companies within marketing services and tech sectors. And within those sectors, we work across, businesses within whether it's performance marketing, MarTech, media, digital, AI. And I think what sets us apart is just the experiences of the team, really. So all of us have spent most of our careers on the entrepreneurial side. So, we've been in your shoes, we've faced similar challenges, and we're operators at heart. So, we now specialize in advising on the corporate finance, fundraise and M&A side. Within those sort of, sectors. So on the capital raise side, generally sweet spot is 5 to 25 million pounds. And on the M&A side, it's 10 to 100 million pound range. And yeah, if you can go next slide, please, Martin. And yeah, just a bit about myself and my co-host, Martin Adams. So yeah, my name's Tom Blah. I'm a partner at Milestone. And Martin here is a senior advisor at Milestone. We actually founded an AI business about 9 years ago, which we successfully sold into a US marketing services group last year. Along the way, we've had the privilege of working with some really awesome brands, some of whom you can see on screen there. And we picked up a few awards in the process as well. So I think our background is, put us really at the forefront of technology and in marketing. And yeah, it allows us to bring that perspective in and through our advisory work as well. So with that, I will hand over to Martin.
Thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Thank you for being here and using your precious time to hear us talk. As Lakai said, yeah, do throw questions at us. I don't think Tom or I are necessarily kind of ones for hype, but I think the genuine feeling here is that AI as a technology, it's here to stay. It's different. I emphasize to people, to think of it as a foundational technology. So rather than sort of simply thinking about it as a discrete piece of software that you use for specific things, to think about it more as sort of a system, really, that you're bringing in to impact the existing, systems that you have in your businesses and to help and improve that. We're going to see on the next slide that, this really does apply end to end. And we're going to talk today about operations, about creative, about commercial, about strategy, about media, even M&A. So, it's so ubiquitous, this technology. It's not just that it's being covered in sort of, that it's like a high point of the hype cycle. It's actually ubiquitous in terms of use by your clients. So I always emphasize that you need a strategy with AI, no matter what. Even if you're saying we don't want to embrace AI particularly, or we only want to do it in very discrete, narrow areas, that is a strategy. But because this is, so widespread, you need to have a position on it. So hopefully you can emerge from today a little bit more confident in your organization for knowing where you should use it, how you should use it, and for viewing it as that foundational technology. There's sort of three core areas that we'll see touched on today. The first is about using AI to sort of drive efficiency, basically, and it kind of speaks for itself. The other is sort of creating more, I guess, kind of staying competitive and being able to pass on cost savings and things like that to your clients. So you're sort of almost improving their lives rather than just improving your own lives. And then the third, which is really way too often overlooked, is the fact that AI can actually help you get to great work. And it does that, in ways that we'll talk about in a second. But just as I mentioned, AI is sort of, think of it as this foundational technology. It really impacts end to end. We're not going to go through this slide in mega detail. There's a QR code there, which I'd encourage you to use, and you can go through and see a copy of this slide, which you can share, etc. So please go ahead and do that. But we thought it would be more sort of interesting, more helpful to pick some of the select areas within here, show some actual examples, and I guess to ultimately to sort of try and help you understand the nature of AI, of this technology, so that you're free from the shackles of listening to people like us sort of tell you use cases, or having, even worse, having consultants come in to tell you. You want to be able to be sort of creatively unlocked. So hopefully we'll be able to give you that confidence by reflecting on the nature of AI. And I guess to extend that invitation, think today and think after this, not simply about using AI for narrow productivity, sort of defined as doing the same thing faster and cheaper. There's nothing wrong with that. Think about it also in terms of wider productivity, i.e. doing the same things but doing them better. And then also think about it as innovation, giving your brand clients more of what they kind of dream of, but they weren't able to ask you for before. And ultimately think about the audiences at the end of this, that hopefully are audiences or prospects that are having a better experience because yourselves and the brands are using AI to give them a better experience. That's sort of the guiding star in many ways. And all of this comes from sort of having really a different relationship with information. That's what I believe AI's sort of gift is. When we look back in 5, 10, 50, 100 years, we'll say, what was the difference that AI made? It changed our relationship with information. It gives us the ability to sort of process information in the market beyond human ability. So to sort of use powerful compute to process at a scale and a depth and a volume that humans can't, to sort of help us almost sense what is out there in the world, what audiences want, to broaden our perspective, to have sort of empathy with audiences that we maybe aren't quite like us, and to do that in a way that sort of we weren't able to do within the four-walled sort of organization. I think that is what a lot of the agency function has always been, to extend the brand's sort of reach for information. And so AI and generative AI are both really, really helpful ways of doing that. But also, especially generative AI, gives us the ability to then precisely and confidently respond with something quickly that meets that demand that we've used AI to sense. So it's kind of narrow AI and then generative AI to help us sort of become sensing and responding organizations. If you think about the difference between sort of machines and humans, we do process information in different ways. So the machine is much more about pattern recognition. It's rule oriented. It's about deduction, whereas the human brain is about sort of induction. It's about creative thinking, lateral thinking. It's about feeling and intuition often. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that they are different, but smart organizations manage to put these together to get the best outcome for the brand client and for the audience more generally. And I think agencies, have always been very good people organizations. They've always been very good at bringing in particularly good lateral thinkers and kind of intuitive, creative thinkers. And so I don't think that AI changes that. I think it bolsters that. Our hiring and everything else should still be very much focused on that. But we want those people to be able to leverage the power and the difference of sort of, of AI. And maybe if we give it a specific example here. So UBS a few years ago, they wanted to make content rather than advertising for their high net worth audiences that they were trying to understand and sort of target. But they knew in order to make the content, they sort of needed a trigger. They needed a reason to make something interesting that would nurture or educate or inform that audience. But they didn't have an understanding of that audience, these high net worths who are sort of living in a different sort of social strata from everyone else. So they used narrow AI. They were using Codec.ai to process the content interactions that are specific, this kind of high net worth audience we're interacting with, to understand them beyond just the banking sphere, beyond just being a high net worth individual. And what they saw was lots of interactions with kind of content around depression and loneliness and anxiety and isolation, because it turns out actually it's not all great to be in that sort of elevated, separated sphere of society. So this gave them this use of narrow AI to understand the audience and broaden the kind of 3D-ify their perspective on this audience, allowed them then to know what content would work. And so they created Unlimited with their creative agency and their digital agencies. And there was a kind of content hub that talked about these non-obvious mental health and how money and mental health interacted, et cetera, et cetera. So great results, nearly 180% sort of increase in their lead generation. And we're seeing here AI used not just to create an image, but to actually unlock, I guess, what I would call empathy, an ability to understand an audience that we wouldn't otherwise be able to understand. And that kind of takes us then into the second piece. Once you've used narrow AI to understand demand, to understand audiences' interests, their passions, the communities that they're part of, you can then use sort of generative AI to respond to that with precision and confidence. So we all know, whatever our company policy on these technologies, we'll all have had a little play on the side and all had that kind of wow moment, I'm sure. This is one of there's so many areas that you can use generative AI, but obviously one of the most palpable and common is using it to create content fast and with less cost, right? You don't have to send photographers, or you don't necessarily need graphic designers for package design and creative staff for the shoot, etc. So DALL-E, Midjourney, these are among some of the sort of text to image platforms that we have. McKinsey are talking about 30 to 50% savings in organizations that are using this early in the process. And I would say for things like product images, advertising, kind of basic ad creative, website content, etc., this is pretty non-controversial use of this technology. Where it gets a little bit more difficult is where you're talking about the brand and the tone of voice and where there's authority for the brand to speak and not speak, etc. That is really where the agency can obviously speak up and provide some sort of guide rails for quality there and for like standards there. There's definitely a backlash. Like, I'd be super keen to know in the questions, or just to make a comment as to whether anyone has had backlash from trying to being motivated to use the technologies by the right thing, which is to kind of get good work and to reduce cost and increase speed, but where the brand client has sort of not been happy. It's described here as like being an obviously fake Chanel bag. Your whole brand immediately appears feeble and incorporated when using this type of these kind of relatively, you can tell the style, right? You can tell the style of what comes out of these text to image platforms very often. And so yeah, people describe it as sort of e-waste. I'd be kind of curious to know if people agree with that. But the strongest position for an agency is obviously one that does understand where it's powerful, but also understands its limitations and can sort of say to the brand, because the brand may be pushing you to use AI to reduce cost and increase speed, but can say it's not 100% appropriate in this instance. So the brand, the agency should have a strong position, an informed position on even to push back against the limitations of this technology, so that the brand is not dominant, basically. What good digital agencies, good leaders, good creative leaders do is they use AI to identify demand in the way that we saw there on the UBS example, and then they use the generative AI more as a sort of production technology to respond to that. And so we got an example here within L'Oreal. NYX was one of the makeup brands within the L'Oreal sort of roster, and they knew that they needed to sort of engage with their audiences. They wanted to do something not simply on the comms side, but on the product side. Very crowded space, the sort of the makeup space. And so what they did was they used narrow AI to sort of process within their CRM to understand the sort of the broader interests and passions of their specific audience. And what they saw was a not so much empathy, but just surprise. They saw that there was certain communities within their CRM that were interacting with goth kind of comedy, goth romance, goth horror. And they said, right, okay, well, we're actually going to reverse engineer our kind of product design here, our new product development, and we're going to make a product that is around that passion and that interest. And they use lots of generative AI to sort of build consensus and to share early creative within. They actually didn't use their agencies at all here, which is very interesting. So in some senses, this shows you the threat to agencies that can come with brands being able to quite quickly get on the same page and see kind of mood boards and creative ideas around a product or around comms. And this is what they did. They put this out without the agency, but you know, they wouldn't. The internal position from L'Oreal was, we wouldn't have had the confidence to do this if we hadn't been able to see, using AI, we hadn't been able to see what this audience had interests outside of makeup that we might be able to sort of adjacently push ourselves into and be relevant within. And secondly, if they hadn't been able to use the generative AI to quickly get on the same page internally and build that consensus. And you know, there was a huge result for them. They sold out the product within 24 hours. They had like a 1.2 million views of their organic views of their launch video. And that's because it's all sort of anchored in this interest and because it is bold. And you can use companies like Audience for this sort of interest-based segmentation, audience.com. And they're processing, you know, a mixture of data sources and pulling that in and giving you that sort of specificity, I guess, that you know, using the third-party wall of content and competition that as agencies were often sort of see as a problem. We're using that mass of third-party content actually as an asset to inform our first-party creative ideas that might go out, because we know what's worked from their interactions with the past content. And this works for B2B clients as well. It's not just all kind of consumer. You know, it's not just all consumer communities that we're talking about. Any interest that has any community that has a shared interest, hairdressers, dentists, lawyers, whatever it might be. These are, you know, these B2B communities as well can be understood with AI and then responded to with AI. And you know, when we can visualize things, we can do bolder things, right? That's how we get to the good work part of using AI, is that we can be bolder and take a little bit more of a leap. That's one thing I'd really encourage you to think about when you reflect on sort of the nature of this technology. It's an inherently connective technology. It can join up teams within the brand. It can join up teams, you know, within your agency. You can get to consensus quicker because of the way that it produces very intuitive natural language outputs, or because it can produce image outputs. And with Sora, OpenAI's Sora product and other sort of entrance to the video market, it can also produce video outputs very, very quickly. So you've got a visual kind of correlative that everyone can look at the same time. That's relatively new. It means that some of the silos in organizations sort of get broken down, and you have maybe, you know, lay people who are sort of coming in and being able to be part of the creative process. That is, again, kind of, if we think about how these technologies work, they can deal with more unstructured data inputs. So you don't need a data scientist or analyst to sort of structure all the data on an audience and put it in Excel tables and clean it up and parse it and do all of those things. You can just sort of, it can pull in from web content, blog content, etc. And then what comes out, again, like I said, is very intuitive, very usable, very accessible, very human. And so if we give an example, like a fashion brand could be processing historical sales data or reports about product returns or customer review trends, seasonal patterns. It could be pointing the machine at sort of a write-up from New York, you know, Times about the fashion week, and pulling in from magazine content. So all of these different unstructured, data inputs now are available, this is one of the ways it changes our relationship with information, right? Is it can pull from a wider set. And then what comes out is, again, sort of very, very intuitively. So I guess practically think about a wider, you need almost a new strategy on data to be able to use AI properly. So think about the wider array of relevant data beyond what you've traditionally used, and start thinking about other teams, other functions in the organization that might benefit from these, these data out, these new outputs that they've traditionally not had. Content teams, production teams, media teams, sort of almost use AI as an opportunity to join up these teams with the same data. And we saw that slide earlier, where it really is an end-to-end piece. It really does impact so many sort of parts of the agency workflow. On the sort of the media side here, we've looked at some sort of audience segmentation. We looked at some new product development and comms that has gone out using different sort of generative AI and narrow AI. In terms of the media side, there's a lot of promise here. If you follow the logic of how these technologies work, it's all about tagging, right? It's all about sort of tagging content. And so the logic should flow that the sort of goal of personalized one-to-one messaging or in-flight sort of dynamic creative optimization, that should be better and more personal with using these technologies. The reality at the moment is it's quite hard to link to those platforms, sort of to link the media side with the creative side. They're just not where they're at yet in terms of the infrastructure and APIs and things like that. So what I've seen in media is more companies using current tools to free them up, and where appropriate, sort of to automate more than innovating. So it's in that, before I invited you to think about narrow productivity and wider definition of productivity, it's sort of in that zone rather than doing something different and truly innovating. So you've got companies like Basis, which is using generative AI's ability to do what we just talked about, to understand unstructured data sources and to output them in sort of helpful human sounding ways. They're doing that to integrate sort of a wider range of media buy related data sources and then unite teams around them as sort of a platform for AI. Again, it's kind of connective technology, and removing the need for sort of that expensive, process of manual data collection, which is time consuming, prone to human error, etc. So I think that's like one area. And then you have companies like Adverity, who are, there's some great case studies. I'd encourage you to go on their website of them with Colgate using it to sort of generate automated customizable reports on the media side that are going to the brand. And again, because of the outputs are so human, they're very understandable by the brand. So we're increasing transparency and frequency of communications and joining up with the brand. I think that smart agencies and smart leaders they embrace this connective nature of the technology. So McDonald's used the language of sharing the pen, where they actually kind of playfully use the technology to engage their audiences creatively. So an example, not from McDonald's, but from Nike, they sort of invited audiences to use text to image platforms to create a design for, sneakers. And then for a certain number of those, they actually created the product and, kind of created all these sort of viral loops around sharing that and creating them, and people taking photos of them when they received them, etc. And Tommy Hilfiger have done the same sort of thing around inviting the audience to have the pen on giving design ideas and providing a source of innovation. And like this, here's what we really want. Again, that idea of demand triggers. They use AI, generative AI, to actually allow them to show what they want. What a beautiful kind of tool, right? And so that's the way that brands are using it with audiences. For agencies, we can share the pen with the brand client because the brands themselves have the power now to quickly and cheaply create and share ideas. So agencies are already receiving briefs that are sort of, we want it to look a little bit more like this. There's a mood boarding process and a consensus building process that's very quickly happened in the brand, even before the agency receives the brief. That might be a challenge for some agency economics, you know, based on kind of charging for time, but it's certainly something to be aware of no matter what. And I would say, don't be, you know, try not to be too scared about it. I think it's just a new dynamic, but it's what the brand now expects essentially. They want to sort of have almost an instantaneous response and a sort of a constant, you know, companion to exchange ideas, to push back, etc. That is, if we think about the agency role, in many ways, being that kind of constant companion, being available to challenge the brand, to agree with the brand, just to be there, you know, to bounce off of the brand, is definitely one of the roles that, you know, the agency has played traditionally. And another role is to bring an outside world perspective. The brand often is sort of in a bit of an ivory tower, focusing on its own operations, right? And it's kind of a little bit introverted, and the agency kind of keeps things fresh and says, look, we have a wider view of the world. We've worked, you know, the people that we're going to working on your product or your brand have worked across a number of different brands. They have perspective. Again, that is potentially challenged by brands' use of things like AI agents and custom GPTs, because you can go into, you know, GPT, you can create a custom persona, for example. So what you can see on the screen here is a specific doctor who has a PhD in a sort of niche field, and she's an expert on the following areas. And then you can use that GPT, custom GPT, to ask questions. And if you were annoyed, you know, for people like you, what product would work, or what sort of tone of voice of the communication should we have, or what would you be alienated by? So all these questions that maybe the brand would come to the agency before, they now have to, you know, that maybe they now have another asset. I resist that sort of narrative. I think that the agencies will always be able to hire people who have more perspective, and I think that agencies should have a data strategy where they're able to sort of bring the diverse data that they have from working across lots of different brands to create their own sort of custom GPTs that the brand itself, being so narrow, will never be able to do. So you have sort of a broader, richer, better, more accurate persona that you've developed. And in that way, you know, the agency role is retained, but maybe actually the quality of what the agency is doing in terms of pulling a market perspective is actually better. And they're kind of bringing that back so that the brand and the audience, benefits from it. And, you know, that's, again, one of the natures of this technology. So we said it was foundational. It's also exponential. You know, smart agency leaders, I guess they know they can't win the future by sort of accurately trying to predict it right now, and certainly not by themselves, right, as individuals. They know that this is a technology that you get the best out of by, you know, using it with other people, other teams in your organization, across the agency, in connection with the brand, leveraging these sort of new data inputs, and new ideas, new creative ideas on, like, this is how we might be able to use it. I always say sort of humans can't see around corners. We just have not been given that capability. But if you're using AI in that way, sort of edging forward, trying things out, you know, using it, being open about your position on it, using it with the brand, using it, having other people in the organization almost provide like a decentralized approach where they can say, you know, here's an idea. That is much better than having a hierarchical, top-down, individual-led strategy on AI. And to do that, you know, you can't sit there and pause and try and have the perfect strategy. You sort of, you know, smart leaders get started now, I guess, is the basic message. But yeah, I will pass over to Tom to talk a little bit more about some of the operational and financial wins that we can get from AI. So Tom, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So yeah, just like to revisit that slide that you'd previously shown, Martin. So you obviously discussed very much the kind of human element and human way of thinking as well. But if you just take a look at the machine side of it, it's pretty clear that that type of thinking is going to be pretty effective for operations and finance effectively. So you can just move to the next slide. So AI it's really excelling in these types of areas, whether it's categorizing, translating, analyzing risk, detecting sentiment. This sort of stuff is really essential to improving, efficiency and handling operational challenges. Next slide, please. Yeah, and it's really good at, streamlining day-to-day tasks. If you think about something in an area like project management and task automation, it can be really effective. Most people on this call, I would imagine, are using tools for project management. Platforms like Monday.com and Asana are, building out integrated AI features that help on the automation side. So, if you're managing a large campaign or, it can do things like the automated reminders, tracking time, that sort of thing. And I think Monday.com in particular have been investing quite a lot of money into the AI integration. On the resource allocation side, so obviously this is an area that agencies, constantly struggle with, right? There's useful tools like Forecast app is quite good, as it can, use its AI to effectively determine a future upcoming busy season. It can track sort of project timelines and then give you suggestions when it comes to things like, do you need to hire extra staff? Do you need to reallocate staff somewhere else? And then just on the client reporting side of things, Crystal is quite a useful tool. So that can analyze your client's communication style and help you tailor your email or help you tailor your presentation towards them as well. And I think a lot of the sort of tools on the operations side and on the finance side, they didn't necessarily start out as AI solutions. They're productivity tools a lot of the time, but so the best ones have been able to smartly integrate AI into their platforms in order to make it much more efficient and effective. Next slide, please. Yeah, and just on the finance side, AI has been strong for quite a while in the budget management and expense tracking. So something like Divi is quite useful, as you get real-time updates if you're coming close to a prescribed budget, for example. And it naturally kind of keeps you in check and gives you the sort of parameters, and will make sure you're on top of things. On the invoicing and payment side, Topality is relatively useful, I would suggest. Especially if you've got multiple clients with multiple different billing requirements, it could just automate all those tasks and save a huge amount of time. And then on the financial modeling and forecasting side, so we don't really use many AI tools on the financial modeling side at Milestone. I think if you've got someone who's experienced on the corporate finance side, who's very strong Excel skills, you've got a good management team with a clear vision, you're going to get to a point where you've got a very strong, realistic and accurate model. I would say when it comes to more complex models, probably best suited for larger corporates, something like Anaplan is decent when it comes to scenario planning. So rather than having to kind of duplicate your Excel, make sure it all sort of ties together, you can use Anaplan to scenario forecast. But yeah, like I said, it's slightly geared more towards the larger corporate, and it's not particularly user friendly, I would say. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think I want to talk now a bit about the growing trend of agencies acquiring AI companies. Whether it's for the tools or for AI consultancies or capabilities that they just want to bring in-house. I'm going to focus this section primarily on the AI consultancies, though, as I think they're much more relevant to agencies and synergistic to agencies, both with in terms of the business model as well as multiples as well, valuation multiples. So when it comes to buying AI tools and sort of pure tech, it's a bit more friction, I would say, for agencies, just because it's, you're likely bringing in potentially a SaaS model into an existing sort of services-based model. You also have the valuation multiples, which are, can be a bit crazy, I guess, on the tech side at the moment. And, when it comes to rationale for buying AI consultancies, three core ones, really. So bringing in the AI capabilities in-house is ultimately going to help keep you sort of being able to offer this to your clients is going to help keep you ahead of the curve. A lot of clients at the moment, certainly the big corporates, are navigating pretty complex technical challenges at the moment. So having those skills in-house can you can offer that service to the clients. It also opens up direct revenue streams, right? So BCG think they will do around 20% of their revenue this year from AI consulting. Depth is I think going to do around 30% from AI related services this year. So really it is a direct revenue stream and a really fast growing one as well. And then just on the multiple side of things, you can drive up the value of your business and the multiples of your business if you get it right. So you can use the AI skills in-house to internally optimize, I guess, and drive up your gross margins. Equally as well, you can charge fairly premium prices on AI consulting, as it's really high in demand at the moment. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I just want to give a bit of an overview as to how we see AI consultancies in the market at the moment. So it's a bit of a spectrum. On one end, you've got the digital product agencies, and generally they will use a lot of Gen AI, and they will be relatively low on proprietary technology. Not to say they don't have any, but they won't have as much as the further down you go the spectrum. However, they can be really useful acquisitions, right? Because you can bring in practical AI applications without having any big major infrastructure changes that you need to make. In the middle, I guess, is probably the more traditional, which seems like a weird word to use in such a new market, but these would be automation, analytics, AI strategy consultancies, and a lot of these are going to be sort of brand leaning, so they'll be really comfortable understanding brand dynamics, but they're able to solve technical challenges for those brands. So they're really, really valuable at this point. And there's some really exciting ones out there, like 10x is really cool business. So is Vector Labs as well. And these guys will generally have kind of medium levels of proprietary tech. So they will be building on top of sort of existing models and having their own proprietary owned ones, I guess. At the other end of the spectrum, then you've got the much more advanced systems. So these guys will have really advanced proprietary technology and models, and they'll specialize more so in sort of system testing and vulnerability analysis for complex AI systems. I would say, these firms will work mostly with large corporate clients, or with, often with governments as well. I would say these are the least valuable directly to a sort of traditional marketing agency, but they would be the most valuable to someone like a management consultancy. And a good example of those is Advi, who are a London-based company, really, really strong technical founders. Next slide, please. Yeah, and just somewhat to finish off, I guess, the key considerations if you are looking to make an acquisition in the space of an AI consultancy is, all the standard acquisition rules still apply, right? So, you should be looking for recurring revenue, similar client profile without excessive overlap, low client concentration, strong management team. But there's a few factors I think which are relatively unique to M&A in this space with the AI consultancies. I think the first one being the valuation tensions that certainly we've seen probably over the last year, but it's kind of dying down somewhat. But sellers are often expecting AI multiples, due to the level of technology or technological skill within the business. Whereas buyers are trying to say, well, you guys are still a consultancy, and therefore consultancy multiples are appropriate. I think, as more and more of these businesses come into the market, we're seeing the sort of delta between the valuation of the buyer and the seller start to narrow, which is really good for the market anyway. I think as well, on the synergy side and cross-selling, a lot of agency offerings will fit in really nicely with, either the sort of first or second stage of AI consultancy from the previous slide. So it's kind of a natural and more technical evolution, I would say. So really, you should be expecting and targeting some immediate revenue synergy and uplift on that. And then I think the last one is probably the most overlooked, where it's the talent retention side of things. So these AI consultancies, they're going to have, lots of teams of really highly skilled and high in demand people. So my recommendation would be, don't just think about the founders and locking them in. You really have a think about, wider retention across the business, making sure you've got, the proper incentive plans in place, maybe, potential equity with vesting, that sort of thing. And then, yeah, just finally from my side, just to run through a couple of interesting example transactions recently. So Engine B was acquired recently by CLA. They're quite interesting as they're an AI consultancy, but they focus a bit more on the accounting side of things, hence why they're acquired by a large accountancy. But I think it's a good example of an AI consultancy being of value to a large services-based business, and the model fit in well together. Accenture, I think, sort of everyone knows, they've been on a bit of a roll when it comes to buying up these types of businesses and tech-enabled businesses. But then I think the Artifact acquisition of Arca Blanca was really interesting. So Artifact are a data services company. So generally they're really competent in the tech space anyway. But they brought in Arca Blanca to deepen the AI and digital transformation piece specifically so they can stay ahead of the curve on that. Yeah, and I'll hand back to Martin to sum up, and then I think we can take some questions.
Awesome, thanks. So yeah, I guess just to capture a little bit of what we spoke about, we showed that this is this is something that is foundational, that impacts end to end and essentially every part of the sort of the creative or agency workflow. We said that we should be using sort of traditional analytical back-end narrow applied AI for analyzing what audiences want, to understand demand and to use that early in the process to sort of upstream, rather and in that sense sort of resist the urge to just go and use these technologies simply as production technologies. First we need to get to an insight and know that what we're making is sought after and get specificity and precision from that. And then we can use sort of generative AI to respond to that, to create things that audiences actually want. But also we can use it, and the fact that it can create content faster and cheaper, we can use it internally to build connection across different teams, across different sort of nodes of our business. If you follow the logic of how AI works and how it gets to, in brackets, kind of in quotes, like intelligence, it's a function of the amount of connected nodes and the amount of information that the models are given. That's the limiting factor on its development of intelligence. If you follow that logic into your own organization, using these technologies to join up nodes of your business and to be able to share more information more quickly, is going to increase your organizational intelligence. So we can do that. We can use the fact that it's fast and cheap to build consensus or to get a disagreement even, but either way, we're looking at the same thing earlier in the process. And then we talked about, I guess, out of principle, sort of how you should act here. You should act across the whole agency. Don't silo this. Don't treat it simply as a kind of discrete special ops team who's going to use AI so that you can tick the box of saying we use AI. It's about trying and testing across the whole organization and doing the same with the client, being open enough and confident enough that you're willing to say to the client, no, we don't think using it for campaign content in this instance is going to be good. We think that there'll be we'll think it looks a bit like the Chanel handbag example, like it might devalue the brand. So being able to push back, but also being able to sort of embrace it where it's appropriate. I think I saw a lot of agencies about a year and a half ago taking principled stands against AI, like, oh, we don't even look at that, we're not exploring that, we don't agree with that. You can't do that anymore, right? You have to take an open position with it and use it back and forth with the brand. We talked about sort of using it not just for narrow productivity or even wider productivity, but to actually innovate. There's a really good report that's just come out from ServiceNow on sort of they call it the Maturity AI Index, and they say that of what they call the pace setters, the companies who are really using it at scale, getting huge bottom line sort of financial wins, they're changing their business from using AI. The majority of those, I think it was 33% of those had innovation as their chief goal of using AI, whereas the other companies, 14% of them had innovation as their chief goal of using AI. Those ones were not pace setters. They all lagged behind. So your Northern Star here is how do we delight audiences, do things we couldn't do before, deliver on that kind of continuous improvement, continuous innovation principle, rather than how do we just do the same thing faster and cheaper. And we talked about the fact that given the exponential nature of these technologies, we have to act now. We can't sit here and plan perfectly. Proper, appropriate agency leadership is about getting your hands dirty and getting going with it now. So thank you all so much for your time. I think we're going to answer some of the questions now. So let us just get on to that. 1 second.
Yes, thank you, Martin and Tom. So for everyone on the line, feel free to ask any questions that you might have. You can use the Q&A feature and we'll address them as they come in. And just a quick reminder, we did record this discussion and we will share it along with any notes. I saw a question come through about that. So you can have that to share with you and your teams. And then lastly, before we dive into the questions, I do want to thank Tom and Martin for carving out time for this, as well as Milestone Advisory for putting this together and sponsoring this talk. It's been really insightful. And so moving on to the questions, Martin and Tom, do you kind of want to dive through them or do you want me to narrate them?
Do you want to go, Tom?
Yeah. So there's a question that's coming from Stuart, which I think, Martin, maybe you're slightly better off answering than me, but how transparent should agencies be about their use of AI tools and platforms in the work they deliver to clients?
I think they should be very transparent. I think that the way that these AI platforms themselves have priced themselves is, it's the classic Uber model of we're going to use all the venture capital money and Microsoft money, etc., that we've raised to make this extremely accessible, extremely cheap and easy for a consumer to come on and jump on. So the point I'm trying to make there is that there's no hiding here about the economics of these technologies or how they work. And so I would be sharing, number one, the fact that that you as an agency are using them, and number two, I would be sharing, ultimately the impact that that's had in terms of an increase in speed, quicker time to get to the outputs, the fact that you don't have those costs of professional photographers and studios and stuff, because where it's appropriate, you've used the generative technologies to create creative or sample creative there. So I would be very, very transparent, and I think in the long run, building that trust, you become an agency that the brand itself will come to and look for new ideas. And just to state the obvious, and I often get asked this, like, okay, so within the brand, who owns the AI agenda? Who do we need to be getting to here? And I don't know if it's an inconvenient answer, but it's totally different in each brand. So sometimes it's the CEO, sometimes it's the CFO who wants to get the cost wins. Sometimes it's an innovation head, a CMO, a CDO. It can sort of really be anybody. And so we're still in this early phase where I would be open about the fact that you're using it. I would be passing on the impact that this has on economics. That ultimately is how you build the trust, and that's profitable in the long term.
Yeah, there's another question that's come through. So do you think AI consultancies will maintain their value as more agencies start building their own AI capabilities in-house? It's actually a pretty interesting question. I would say I would expect to see a softening in the value of them as the agencies start upskilling, plus new entrants into the AI consultancy market are coming in almost daily, I guess. But the good ones will still bring a lot of specialized expertise and potentially quite a lot of proprietary tech as well. So I do see it softening somewhat, but not totally falling off a cliff or anything like that.
I can take one. There's a question here. What are you seeing on brand side in terms of AI adoption that could pose a challenge to agencies? Are there trends where brands are investing in-house AI capabilities that could shift the dynamic with agencies. I think that if you follow the logic of these technologies, it will, and I mentioned, an example of the custom GPTs and, persona development that brands can develop. I think if you follow the logic on that, it and also obviously creating maybe more generic content, not like hero campaign content or like brand lifting content, but more generic sort of content marketing, etc. I think that the brand's hand, let's call it, is strengthened by the way that these technologies work. So that's the theory, and maybe to bear in mind for the medium to long term. But right now, brands are not sufficiently comfortable or confident about the contours of what you can and can't do with these technologies. The stats are, Accenture did a report on this year, that 85% of brands are in the, they're in the ball pit. They're just picking up different colors of balls and sort of throwing them up and seeing if they like that. And obviously that's an analogy. They're kind of different projects, different innovation use cases, different teams, it's very random at the moment. There's only 10% of brands that have sort of done that ball pit. They've played around, they've worked out what they want, and now they are sort of scaling those use cases. And then there's only about 5% that are actually have like almost an industrialized strategy where they're using this for growth and delivering those bottom line benefits that we talked about. So the brand really is looking for someone to bounce off of, and someone who is a leader and has a kind of confident view on AI, including, as we talked about, its limitations. So to answer the question, no, not really seeing that in-house movement being enhanced at this moment. And so that's an opportunity for agencies to step in and solidify their position with the brand, to further develop the relationship of trust, and as Tom mentioned, to open up revenue opportunities of essentially advising where and how you can use these technologies. But in the long run, keep your eye on that dynamic of in-housing, because that the technology logic would be that it helps achieve that. I've got another one here. Someone asked about how should we change the way that we hire and look at talent in the organization based on these technologies. It's a very good question. As I mentioned, agencies have traditionally been good at kind of giving, they're able to attract good creative minds who have the benefit of hopping across different briefs and brands and problems. And I would say that is a thing that agencies should continue to do, and that they will always have an advantage over brands around, because obviously with the brand you're going deeper in a specific problem set. But I would say that to the extent that agencies are hiring curious people who want to interrogate information, pull new information, etc., that has to happen. That has to continue. The other areas, kind of like it's almost like you don't want knowledge workers anymore. You don't want someone who just turns up and says, I've got a bunch of knowledge, here it is, I'm going to trade it in for a salary. You want people who are curious about how they can use these technologies to get to to change that relationship with information that we talked about. So it's just a little bit of a nuance. It's a little bit of a general point, but you're looking to hire for curiosity and for openness and for willingness to use these technologies, rather than someone who's like, you've got pharma clients, I've worked on pharma clients, I'm the best candidate for the job. So I think there's a slight nuance there in terms of what we're looking to hire. And the other thing that I would say related is, I talked about AI as a system that you're bringing it into an existing system. you have systems in your organization, your people and how they work together. That's an existing system. So when you're bringing in this this new system, sort of have sensitivity to the way that you talk about it. You want to create sort of psychological safety. Some leaders get so excited about trying to change their valuation, or if they're a public company, you know, change their share price by hyping up the fact that they're going to bring in AI and it's going to automate everything, and that leaves your existing people feeling psychologically unsafe, feeling alienated, feeling like they might be out of a job. And so one of the it's not a slower down or a barrier to taking to AI adoption, to kind of speak about it a little bit more gently and talk about it as augmenting human processes and allowing us to do more and better things and innovate. That's not a slower down of adoption of AI. It actually greases the wheels, because these technologies, you need your teams to be coming up with ideas about using them. You need your teams to be connecting, and you need your teams to be suggesting new ideas about how these early, nascent, but exponential technologies can sort of be deployed. And you won't get that if you make the mistake of beating the drum around automation and replacing jobs. So yeah, I think that's probably us at time. Tom, unless you had anything else?
No, good, my side.
Yeah, so we're right at time. We'll end it here, and I know that there may be a few more questions that come through, and we'll be sure to address them over email. And as I mentioned before, we'll share the recording along with any additional answers, and then of course, contact information for Tom and Martin to continue the discussion. Thank you all for joining, and have a great afternoon or evening, or wherever you may be.
Okay.